On a warm May night in 1996, under the dim glow of a California campus streetlight, a tall, spirited college freshman named Kristin Smart was last seen alive, walking back from a party, never to be found again. For decades, her fate haunted her family and community until justice finally arrived in 2023. Kristin Denise Smart was 18 years old, and in so many ways she embodied what it meant to be standing at the edge of life's possibilities. She had been born in Augsburg, Germany, where her father Stan was working as a teacher. Her mother, Denise, had nurtured in her daughter a curiosity that reached far beyond the places they lived. Eventually, the family settled in Stockton, California, where Kristin grew into a vibrant and athletic young woman. She played sports, she loved adventure, and she dreamed of traveling the world. At 6 feet 1 inch tall, she was striking in appearance, an undeniable presence in any room she entered. Kristin was, by all accounts, a dreamer. She wanted to study international relations, become a diplomat, or perhaps work with people across cultures. Her letters to her parents brimmed with longing for independence and a desire to create a future larger than herself. In 1996, as a freshman at California Polytechnic State University, San Luis Obispo, commonly known as Cal Poly, she was beginning that journey. But adjusting to college life wasn't without difficulty. Kristin was far from her tight-knit family, and she sometimes felt isolated on the sprawling campus tucked into California's Central Coast. She had friends but was still finding her place. The Memorial Day weekend of that year offered an opportunity for fun, a break from routine. On Friday, May 24, 1996, Kristin decided to go to an off-campus party. The house on Crandall Way was buzzing with the energy of college students ready to kick off the long weekend. Music pulsed from the speakers and laughter echoed across the street. Kristin, wearing her casual black shorts, a crop top, and her now iconic red Puma sneakers, mingled with ease. She danced, she chatted, and she enjoyed herself. By the end of the night, however, she was visibly intoxicated. Around 2 a.m., Kristin left the party. She wasn't alone at first. Several students departed in the same direction, including Cheryl Anderson, another Cal Poly student, and Paul Flores, a fellow freshman whose reputation on campus was already problematic. Flores was known by some for his awkward, often unsettling behavior, earning him the cruel nickname Chester the Molester. That night, he seemed particularly eager to stay by Kristin's side, offering to help her walk since she was unsteady. Anderson accompanied them part of the way. As they moved closer to campus, she eventually peeled off toward her own dorm, leaving Kristin alone with Paul Flores. Witnesses later reported seeing the two continue on, Kristin leaning on him for support. It was the last time she was seen alive. The following day, Kristin's absence raised no immediate alarms. It was a holiday weekend after all, and many students left campus for trips or visits home. But when she failed to show up for classes and missed a planned phone call to her parents, concern grew. Her roommate assumed she was away. By Monday, worry had hardened into dread. When Kristin's parents received the news that she was missing, their world collapsed. Denise Smart later described the gut-wrenching disbelief, the immediate instinct that something was terribly wrong. Their daughter was responsible, thoughtful, and not the kind of person to simply disappear. They quickly traveled to San Luis Obispo to join the search. The university and local authorities were initially slow to react. Kristin's disappearance was first treated as if she were a runaway or had gone on an impromptu trip. This delay proved critical. It was only after several days that the San Luis Obispo Sheriff's Office began treating the matter as suspicious. By then, crucial evidence had been compromised. Investigators soon zeroed in on Paul Flores. He was the last known person with Kristin. His dorm room, when finally checked, raised red flags. Cadaver dogs alerted strongly to the scent of human decomposition near his mattress. Yet by the time authorities arrived, the mattress had been replaced. No physical evidence, no body, no blood, no DNA, was found that could conclusively link Flores to Kristin. Flores gave inconsistent accounts. He claimed he walked Kristin as far as her dorm, and then returned to his own. But no one saw her enter her building. And Flores's behavior immediately after the disappearance only deepened suspicion. He showed scratches on his body that he could not explain. His story never aligned with witness testimony. The Smart family's anguish deepened as the days turned to weeks. They threw themselves into action, organizing searches, handing out flyers, pleading for information. They could not accept the slow pace of the investigation. Every lead that fizzled felt like another blow. Volunteers scoured fields, ravines, and the rugged coastline, but there was no sign of Kristin. By the end of summer 1996, the case was already stalling. Though investigators strongly suspected Flores, they lacked the hard evidence to make an arrest. Kristin's body had not been found. Without it, prosecutors knew securing a conviction would be nearly impossible. And so Paul Flores remained free, even as the shadow of suspicion followed him everywhere. The Smart family's grief was compounded by frustration with the system. They felt dismissed, their daughter's case not given the urgency it deserved, but they refused to give up. In the years to come, they would turn their pain into persistence, never allowing Kristin's name to fade from memory. Yet as the 1990s wore on, the case slipped further into the category of cold. Paul Flores withdrew from Cal Poly and tried to move on with his life. For the Smarts, moving on was impossible. They had no body to bury, no answers to their endless questions. Their daughter had vanished into the night, and all roads of suspicion led to one man who remained out of reach of the law. But Kristin's story was far from over. It would take decades of pressure, new technology, and an unexpected revival from a small-town podcast to finally bring the truth back into the light. From the earliest days of the investigation, all eyes were fixed on Paul Flores. His connection to Kristin Smart's disappearance was undeniable. He was the last known person seen with her, and his version of events never fully matched up with witness accounts. Flores was an awkward presence at Cal Poly long before Kristin vanished. Classmates and acquaintances described him as socially uncomfortable, sometimes aggressive, and often inappropriate in his interactions with women. His peers had given him the unsettling nickname Chester the Molester, a crude but telling reflection of how others perceived him. For Kristin's friends, it seemed unfathomable that she would have willingly chosen his company that night. The fact that she had been intoxicated, dependent on someone to help her walk, made her even more vulnerable. When investigators finally searched Flores's dorm room, they brought in specially trained cadaver dogs. The animals alerted consistently near his bed, indicating the possible presence of human decomposition. Yet by that point, the mattress had been replaced, and no physical samples could be preserved for testing. In 1996, forensic technology was far less advanced than it would become in later decades. The alert raised suspicions, but it was not enough to bring charges. The Smart family was dismayed by what they saw as fumbled opportunities. Critical time had been wasted in those early days, when searches should have been immediate and thorough. Kristin's dorm room had not been properly secured. Witnesses had not been interviewed quickly enough. The Flores dorm search had been delayed. Every misstep created gaps in the chain of evidence, cracks through which justice could slip away. Paul Flores himself projected a veneer of indifference. When questioned, he offered minimal cooperation. He claimed that after helping Kristin part of the way to her dorm, he had gone to his own and slept. No one could verify this account. He bore a black eye in the days following her disappearance, which he offered conflicting explanations for, once saying he got it while playing basketball, another time saying he bumped his head while working on his truck. Investigators noted the inconsistency, but with no body and no direct evidence, they could not make an arrest. For Kristin's family, the agony of waiting was unbearable. Stan and Denise Smart traveled to San Luis Obispo to confront investigators, pleading with them to recognize the urgency. They placed their trust in law enforcement, but also pushed relentlessly for updates, refusing to let Kristin's case be brushed aside. Billboards with Kristin's face were erected, offering rewards for information. Volunteers flooded the campus and surrounding areas, searching ravines, fields, and remote stretches of the rugged coastline. Still, nothing surfaced. As weeks turned to months, frustration grew. The Smarts came to feel that they had been left to shoulder much of the work themselves. They even filed a civil lawsuit against Paul Flores, attempting to hold him accountable through the courts since the criminal system seemed unable to move forward. In that suit, filed in 1997, the Smarts accused Flores of being responsible for Kristin's disappearance. The case stalled, much like the criminal one, but it served as a public marker of where their suspicions lay. Flores, meanwhile, left Cal Poly. He retreated from the glare of campus scrutiny and tried to slip into the anonymity of everyday life. But whispers and rumors followed him. Wherever he went, the suspicion that he had been involved in Kristin's disappearance clung to him like a shadow. He could not entirely escape it, even though the law had yet to catch up with him. By 2002, 6 years after Kristin vanished, the Smart family faced a heartbreaking legal milestone. Kristin was declared legally dead. For her parents, this was not acceptance. It was simply paperwork that allowed them to pursue legal options. They had no body to bury, no grave to visit. Their daughter remained missing, her fate unresolved. The San Luis Obispo Sheriff's Office periodically revisited the case, but each time it seemed to stall in the same place. Suspicion centered on Flores, but no concrete evidence could tie him to a crime. Detectives searched properties connected to the Flores family. Paul's father, Ruben Flores, came under scrutiny as well. Some believed he may have helped his son conceal Kristin's body. Still, no breakthrough came. For the community, the case became a haunting legend. Kristin's smiling face looked down from billboards and posters for years. Cal Poly students were reminded often of the young woman who had walked home from a party and never arrived. For many parents sending their children to college, Kristin's story was a chilling warning of vulnerability, of how quickly safety could evaporate. The years stretched on, marked by missed leads and dead ends. Detectives changed. New eyes reviewed the files, but the result remained the same. No body, no charges. And yet, the Smart family never wavered. Their devotion was unrelenting. Denise Smart, in particular, became the public voice of her daughter's memory. She gave interviews, worked with victim advocacy groups, and reminded the public that behind every cold case file was a real family still waiting. Technology was also evolving. DNA analysis grew more sophisticated in the early 2000s, and digital forensics began to offer possibilities that had not existed in 1996. Law enforcement agencies around the country began solving decades-old cases thanks to new tools. For Kristin's family, hope flickered that one day those advances might finally bring answers in their daughter's case. But for nearly 2 decades after Kristin's disappearance, the case remained stagnant. Paul Flores was never cleared, but he was also never charged. He lived under suspicion, while the Smarts lived under a cloud of grief. Then, in 2019, more than 20 years after Kristin vanished, something unexpected happened. A local man named Lambert, an amateur podcaster, launched a project called Your Own Backyard. His goal was simple: to retell Kristin's story, to shine new light on a case that had grown cold, and to remind the world that Kristin Smart still mattered. The podcast took off in ways no one had predicted. It reached thousands of listeners, reigniting interest in the case. Lambert interviewed former classmates, law enforcement officials, and members of the Smart family. He pieced together the timeline, uncovered forgotten details, and painted a haunting portrait of Kristin's final hours. His work caught the attention not only of the public, but of law enforcement, who faced renewed pressure to act. The Smarts were deeply moved. For the first time in years, it felt as though the momentum had shifted. Kristin's story was back in the headlines, and with that renewed attention came new leads, whispers, tips, and the possibility that, finally, the wall of silence around Paul Flores might crack. The stage was set for a new phase in the investigation, one that would eventually bring answers long denied. For more than 2 decades, Kristin Smart's disappearance remained one of California's most haunting unsolved mysteries. Her smiling face, frozen in the prime of youth, became a symbol of unanswered questions and missed opportunities. The Smart family lived every day in the shadow of that absence, their grief sharpened by the knowledge that the man they believed responsible still walked free. The years after 2002, when Kristin was declared legally dead, were the hardest. Her parents had to endure birthdays, holidays, graduations, and weddings of Kristin's siblings without her. Every milestone in their lives was paired with a painful reminder of what they had lost. Denise Smart once said that the pain of not knowing where her daughter was, or what had truly happened, was worse than death itself. A burial at least would have given them a place to grieve. Instead, they had silence. In San Luis Obispo, the case grew colder with each passing year. Detectives came and went, each reviewing the file with fresh eyes. But the core problem never changed. No body, no physical evidence, no confession. The suspicion surrounding Paul Flores was overwhelming, but suspicion alone could not move the case into a courtroom. Flores himself kept a low profile but never entirely out of trouble. Over the years, whispers surfaced of him harassing women, making unwanted advances, and displaying the same unsettling behavior that had earned him his reputation back at Cal Poly. He had difficulty holding steady jobs. He lived for a time with his father, Ruben Flores, who himself would become a figure of scrutiny, as investigators began to suspect he might have played a role in covering up his son's crime. Still, law enforcement remained stuck. They conducted searches of properties linked to the Flores family, but nothing definitive was found. Some believed Kristin's remains might have been buried in one location and later moved. Others feared she had been hidden in a place so remote or so well concealed that she might never be recovered. For the Smart family, the fight became a matter of endurance. They refused to let Kristin's name fade into the background of cold case files. They established scholarships in her honor, kept her story alive through media appearances, and maintained an unwavering presence in San Luis Obispo County. Denise Smart, in particular, developed a reputation for her quiet but fierce advocacy. She spoke not just for Kristin, but for families of missing persons everywhere, reminding the public that behind every headline was a family forever changed. Then, in 2019 came a turning point no one could have anticipated. Lambert, a local musician and amateur podcaster, had grown up in the area and remembered seeing Kristin's face on missing person billboards as a child. The case had haunted him. With little more than curiosity and determination, he launched a podcast called Your Own Backyard. Its mission was simple but ambitious: to dig into the details of Kristin's disappearance, to talk to the people who had been there, and to reignite public interest in the case. What began as a personal project quickly gained traction. Lambert's soft-spoken style and meticulous research drew listeners in. He interviewed former students, neighbors, and even law enforcement officials. He pored over old records, tracked down witnesses who had never spoken publicly, and laid out the timeline of that fateful night in 1996 with clarity and care. His podcast painted a portrait not just of Kristin, but of a community that had carried her absence like a scar. The podcast struck a nerve. Listeners across the country tuned in, many for the first time hearing the details of Kristin's case. Tips began to trickle in. Old witnesses, previously overlooked or dismissed, found their voices. Rumors that had once been whispered in private now came to the surface. And importantly, law enforcement took notice. By 2020, the San Luis Obispo Sheriff's Office had renewed its investigation with vigor. Sheriff Ian Parkinson, who had inherited the cold case, credited Lambert's podcast with helping to bring fresh attention and encouraging reluctant witnesses to speak. Deputies served search warrants on properties tied to the Flores family, including Ruben Flores's home in Arroyo Grande. Ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs were deployed. The searches were intense and invasive. Neighbors watched as yards were dug up, soil samples collected, and concrete slabs broken apart. The public followed every development closely, wondering if, at last, Kristin's remains might be discovered. Though no body was found, investigators did gather evidence they believed linked back to the case. Stains, fibers, and disturbed soil that suggested something, or someone had once been buried there. Meanwhile, new information about Paul Flores emerged. Women came forward with allegations that he had harassed or assaulted them in the years after Kristin's disappearance. These accounts painted a disturbing pattern of predatory behavior, reinforcing the belief that Kristin's disappearance had not been a tragic accident, but an act of violence. The renewed investigation energized the Smart family. For the first time in years, they felt that momentum was building. After decades of heartbreak, there was finally movement toward justice. Denise Smart expressed cautious optimism, reminding herself and others not to get carried away until concrete action was taken. But hope was alive again. Behind the scenes, prosecutors were carefully building a case. Without a body, they would need to rely on circumstantial evidence, witness testimony, and forensic findings from the searches. It was not an easy task, but public pressure was mounting, and the sheriff's department seemed determined not to let the case fade back into obscurity. In April 2021, the breakthrough came. Paul Flores was arrested and charged with the murder of Kristin Smart. His father, Ruben Flores, was arrested as an accessory, accused of helping to hide Kristin's body. The news reverberated across California and beyond. For the Smart family, it was a moment they had waited 25 long years to see. Stan Smart called it a bittersweet victory, the relief of progress tempered by the reminder that Kristin was still gone. The arrests set the stage for one of the most anticipated trials in California in decades. But the road ahead was still uncertain. Prosecutors knew the challenges of trying a case without a body. Defense attorneys would argue that there was no proof Kristin had been murdered, only that she was missing. The outcome was far from guaranteed. Yet for the first time, the Smart family could envision justice. After so many years of silence, the wheels of the legal system were finally turning. And as the trial approached, the story of Kristin Smart would once again capture the attention of the nation. The arrest of Paul Flores in April 2021 marked a seismic shift in a case that had languished for 25 years. For the Smart family, it was both a moment of validation and the beginning of another long ordeal. Finally, the man they had believed responsible since the very beginning would stand trial for their daughter's disappearance. Yet with no body and limited physical evidence, the road to conviction would be steep and treacherous. The charges filed against Paul Flores were unequivocal. He was accused of murdering Kristin Smart in his dorm room on the night of May 24, 1996. His father, Ruben Flores, was charged as an accessory, accused of helping to conceal Kristin's body, allegedly burying and later moving her remains to evade detection. The arrests made international headlines, thrusting San Luis Obispo back into the spotlight and reigniting public fascination with the case. Prosecutors emphasized that this was a no-body murder trial, rare but not unprecedented. Across the United States, courts had increasingly accepted circumstantial evidence as sufficient to convict in such cases, particularly when paired with testimony and forensic findings. For District Attorney Dan Dow, the challenge was to weave together decades of suspicion, scattered pieces of evidence, and the chilling accounts of women who claimed Paul Flores had assaulted them in later years. As the legal process unfolded, a central question loomed. Could the state prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Kristin Smart had been murdered and that Paul Flores was responsible? The pretrial hearings stretched across months. Prosecutors laid out their theory. Kristin Smart, intoxicated and vulnerable, had been escorted to Paul Flores's dorm. Once inside, he had taken advantage of her condition and assaulted her. During or after that assault, she had been killed. With the help of his father, Ruben, Paul had hidden Kristin's body, possibly beneath the deck at Ruben's Arroyo Grande home, where investigators later found disturbed soil consistent with human decomposition. Defense attorneys countered by attacking the credibility of the evidence. They pointed out the lack of direct forensic proof. No body, no DNA, no blood. They argued that cadaver dog alerts were not conclusive, and that disturbed soil could have many explanations. Paul Flores's defense maintained that while he was the last person seen with Kristin, there was no proof he had harmed her. As hearings dragged on, the community watched with bated breath. The Smart family sat in court day after day, enduring the painful rehashing of their daughter's final hours. For them, each detail was a wound reopened, but they remained steadfast. Denise Smart often clasped her hands tightly in her lap, her face a mask of endurance. In July 2022, the trial of Paul and Ruben Flores finally began. For security and impartiality, the trial was moved out of San Luis Obispo County to Monterey County, where a jury would be less influenced by decades of local coverage. The courtroom quickly filled with reporters, community members, and advocates who had followed the case for years. Prosecutors opened with a powerful narrative. Kristin Smart was not just missing, she was murdered. They argued that Paul Flores had shown a pattern of predatory behavior toward women, and that Kristin had tragically become his victim. Witnesses described how Flores had hovered around Kristin at the party, how he had insisted on escorting her home, and how she was never seen again. Cadaver dog handlers testified about their alerts to Flores's dorm room back in 1996, describing the dog's consistent reactions near his bed. Forensic experts discussed soil samples from Ruben Flores's property that showed traces consistent with human decomposition. Though degraded over time, these findings suggested that a body had once been buried there. Perhaps most damning were the women who came forward to testify about Paul Flores's conduct in the years after Kristin's disappearance. Several women alleged that Flores had drugged and sexually assaulted them, often while they were incapacitated. These accounts established a disturbing pattern, painting Flores not as a misunderstood young man, but as a predator who had continued his behavior for decades. The defense sought to undermine every point. They emphasized the lack of Kristin's body, asking jurors how they could convict without proof she was even dead. They argued that memories had faded, that witness testimony was unreliable after so many years, and that the state was attempting to convict Paul Flores based on speculation and character assassination. For the Smart family, the trial was an excruciating experience. They had lived with uncertainty for 26 years, and now they were forced to sit through graphic testimony about their daughter's final moments, her possible assault, and the alleged disposal of her remains. Every day in court was another reminder of their loss. And yet, they showed up unfailingly. Their presence was a silent testimony to their love for Kristin and to their determination to see justice done. Observers noted the quiet strength of Denise Smart, who often sat with eyes closed, listening intently as witnesses recounted details too painful for any mother to hear. After months of testimony, the case was finally handed to the jury in October 2022. Tension was palpable. The prosecution had delivered a compelling case, but without a body, nothing was guaranteed. Jurors had to weigh decades-old suspicions against the legal standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Days passed. The Smart family waited anxiously, joined by a community that had been holding its breath for decades. Then, on October 18, 2022, the verdict came. The jury found Paul Flores guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Kristin Smart. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as the words were read. After 26 years, the man long suspected of killing Kristin had finally been held accountable. In a separate verdict, Ruben Flores was acquitted of being an accessory. Jurors said the evidence against him was not strong enough to convict beyond a reasonable doubt. For the Smart family, this was bittersweet. They believed Ruben had played a role, but at least Paul, the man directly responsible, was finally convicted. On March 10, 2023, Paul Flores was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison for the murder of Kristin Smart. Judge Jennifer O'Keefe delivered the sentence, emphasizing the gravity of the crime and the devastation inflicted on Kristin's family. In the courtroom, Denise Smart spoke directly about her daughter's absence. She described the agony of living for decades without answers, the milestones Kristin never reached, the grandchildren she never knew. Her voice, though steady, carried the weight of nearly 3 decades of grief. Paul Flores, as he had done for years, showed little emotion. He maintained his silence, never admitting guilt, never revealing where Kristin's body was. For the Smarts, this remained an open wound. Justice had been served, but Kristin had still not been brought home. The conviction sent ripples through the Central Coast community. For years, Kristin's case had been a symbol of injustice, a reminder of vulnerability. Now, at last, accountability had been achieved. Sheriff Ian Parkinson, who had promised to resolve the case when he took office, credited the persistence of the Smart family and the public attention generated by the Your Own Backyard podcast. Without that spotlight, he acknowledged, the case might never have advanced. The podcast's creator, Lambert, sat quietly in the background during the trial, his role as catalyst recognized by many but never overshadowing the Smarts' loss. He had not sought fame, only resolution for a case that had haunted him since childhood. His work had succeeded beyond what he had imagined. For the Smart family, the verdict was a measure of justice. It did not bring Kristin back, nor did it answer the most painful question, where was she? But it confirmed what they had known in their hearts since 1996, that their daughter's life had been stolen by Paul Flores, and that he would finally be held accountable. The conviction of Paul Flores in October 2022, followed by his sentencing in March 2023, marked the end of one of California's longest and most painful sagas. For the Smart family, it was the justice they had been denied for 26 years. Yet even as relief washed over them, the reality of their loss remained unchanged. Kristin was gone, her body still missing, her voice silenced forever. In the days after the verdict, media outlets across the nation revisited Kristin's story. Her smiling face appeared once again on television screens, this time framed not by the word missing, but by the headlines announcing Paul Flores's conviction. The narrative shifted from mystery to resolution. Kristin was no longer simply a missing person. She was recognized as the victim of a brutal crime. The Smart family issued a statement after the trial, expressing gratitude to prosecutors, law enforcement, and the many volunteers and advocates who had carried Kristin's memory for so many years. They thanked Lambert, whose Your Own Backyard podcast had given the case renewed visibility. Above all, they spoke of Kristin herself, the vibrant young woman whose life had been cut short, but whose spirit remained alive in those who loved her. For Denise and Stan Smart, justice was bittersweet. They had fought for nearly 3 decades, through years of despair, false hope, and heartbreak. The conviction affirmed what they had always known, that Paul Flores had taken their daughter's life. But it did not restore her. It did not answer the most haunting question of all. Where was Kristin? Paul Flores never revealed the location of her body, and he likely never will. In court, he remained stone-faced, offering no admission, no remorse, no closure for the family. This silence continues to wound the Smarts, who long for the chance to lay their daughter to rest properly. Denise Smart once said that she still sets a place for Kristin in her heart at every family gathering, still imagines what her daughter might have become. The ache of what if lingers, even in the wake of justice. The Central Coast community also felt the weight of the verdict. For years, Kristin's disappearance had been a shadow over San Luis Obispo, a constant reminder of vulnerability and tragedy. Students at Cal Poly, who arrived long after 1996, still heard her name, still felt her absence in the stories told by older residents. The university, criticized in the early years for its handling of the case, took steps in later decades to honor Kristin's memory and ensure greater safety for its students. Local residents described a collective exhale after the conviction, a sense that a long open wound had finally begun to heal. But healing did not mean forgetting. Kristin's story would remain woven into the fabric of the community, a reminder of the importance of persistence, advocacy, and the pursuit of justice even when hope seems dim. Kristin Smart's case carries a legacy far beyond San Luis Obispo. It highlighted the challenges of prosecuting no-body cases, demonstrating both the frustrations and the possibilities of building a case through circumstantial evidence. It underscored the importance of community advocacy, showing how families, volunteers, and even independent podcasters can reignite investigations and hold institutions accountable. Perhaps most of all, Kristin's story shines as a testament to a family's unyielding love. For 26 years, the Smarts refused to let their daughter be forgotten. They fought through indifference, bureaucratic delays, and countless disappointments. Their persistence helped keep pressure on authorities and inspired others facing similar tragedies. The case also brought renewed attention to the issue of violence against women on college campuses. Kristin was not the first, nor the last young woman to vanish under such circumstances. Her story became a rallying cry for greater awareness, improved campus safety measures, and stronger support for victims of sexual assault and harassment. The role of Chris Lambert and his podcast Your Own Backyard cannot be overstated. What began as a personal project became a cultural phenomenon, galvanizing public interest and directly contributing to renewed investigative efforts. Lambert himself shied away from the spotlight, insisting that the story was not about him, but about Kristin. Yet his work stands as a powerful example of how storytelling can change the course of justice. By piecing together voices, memories, and overlooked details, Lambert reminded the world that Kristin was not just a cold case file. She was a daughter, a sister, and a friend. His podcast rekindled empathy, and in doing so, it helped break through decades of silence. As Paul Flores began serving his sentence in a California prison, the Smart family continued their quiet campaign for closure. They still hope for the recovery of Kristin's remains, for the chance to bring her home at last. Investigators have not given up, and searches may continue, but the truth lies locked away in the silence of Paul Flores. Yet even without that final piece, Kristin's story has reached a kind of resolution. Justice, delayed though it was, has been delivered. Paul Flores will live out his life behind bars, stripped of freedom, his name forever tied to the crime he tried for decades to escape. The Smarts carry forward with resilience. They continue to honor Kristin through scholarships and charitable efforts, ensuring that her legacy is one of inspiration rather than tragedy. Her name is spoken not only in sorrow, but in remembrance of her vitality, her dreams, and the light she brought into the world. Kristin Smart walked into the night on May 24, 1996, a college freshman on the cusp of everything. She never returned. For 26 years, her family lived in a purgatory of grief, clinging to hope, demanding answers, and carrying her memory through every obstacle. At last, in 2023, justice came. Not as quickly as it should have, not as completely as they wished, but enough to affirm the truth they had always known. Her story reminds us that justice can be slow, but persistence matters. It reminds us that even when institutions falter, families and communities can keep the flame alive. And it reminds us that behind every headline is a human life, full of promise, deserving of dignity. Kristin's fate is tragic, but her legacy endures. Through her family's love, through the voices that refused to let her be forgotten, and through the justice that finally arrived, she remains present. Her life was stolen, but her story lives on. A story of resilience, of truth, and of the long, painful, but ultimately victorious pursuit of justice. Kristin Smart should have had decades ahead of her: careers, adventures, family, love. Instead, her life ended on a warm May night in 1996, stolen by someone she barely knew. But though she was silenced, she was never forgotten. For 26 years, her parents, her siblings, her friends, and her community carried her name like a banner, refusing to let it fade. And at last, their voices brought justice to the quiet California town where she disappeared. Paul Flores sits behind bars now, his silence unable to erase the truth. Kristin's family still waits to bring her home, but they no longer wait for justice. That chapter, hard-won and painfully delayed, has finally closed. What remains is memory, love, and the certainty that Kristin Smart's story, though tragic, will continue to inspire persistence, courage, and hope for every family still searching for answers.